everybody showing up. And I will now hand the meeting over to Brian to have the call to order and explanation of teleconference meeting procedures.
This is Brian. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, there he is.
Yep, I'm online. Thank you, Scott. So welcome everybody to the Montgomery County MUD number 36 Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, February the 27th, 2021. Glad to hear that y'all are doing well, relatively speaking, considering the circumstances out there, and are able to participate in the meeting this evening. As in prior meetings, I'll briefly go through the meeting procedures, perform a roll call. So to begin with, I need to remind everyone the meeting is being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we will continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely this evening so that we can accurately reflect the attendance in the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. When you hear your name or your company called, please start by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed the roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. So starting with our board of directors, Scott Haynes.
Present.
Hang on just a second. I got to pull my agenda back up. Jan Price.
Present.
Mamie Polk.
Present.
John Yours.
Present.
And Sheila Faxel is absent. We will be accepting her resignation this evening. We'll go ahead and move on to Woodlands Water staff, Jim Stinson.
Jim is signed off for the time being.
Okay, Mike Mooney.
Present.
Maureen Bourgeois.
Present.
Jeannie Scott.
Present.
Shelley Lawson Kennedy.
I'm here.
This is Brian. Anyone else from Woodlands Water on the line? If not, we'll move on to San Jacinto River Authority. Ron Kellen.
Present.
Chris Meeks.
Present.
Matt Corley.
Present.
Anyone else from Woodlands Water in the meeting? Okay, we'll move on to MUD 36 consultants. Do we have any MUD 36 consultants in the meeting? Okay, we'll move on to members of the public. Do we have any members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well. All right, Maureen, any other numbers that have not been identified on the roll call?
There are no numbers.
Okay, this is Brian. That completes the roll call. I'll hand it back over to you, Scott, to begin the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have any comments from the public? Don't believe so. Item 3, consider an act on request for adjustments to or relief from the specific charges imposed by the district.
This is Jeannie, and I don't have any, Scott.
This is Mike. I have none this month either.
Okay, I don't know the future, but I think we're going to have some of these in the future, beginning next month.
I think you're right.
And we will look forward to considering each and every one of them. So
Well,
at this time,
it's just the ones over $1,000. all the hundreds that are under that, I'll get the pleasure of approving them.
Yeah. And Mike, we know you will do a great job taking care of it. We will move to the consent agenda. Are there any items that the directors would like to separate from the consent agenda? If so, please let me know. If not, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda. John?
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
This is Mamie. I second.
Motion's been made and seconded. We will now vote on the consent agenda. Scott Haynes, aye. Jan Price,
Aye.
Mamie Polk,
Aye.
John Yours.
Aye.
Okay, the consent agenda is approved. We'll move to the regular agenda. Item 10, acceptance of Director Faxel's resignation from the Board of Directors. Brian, is this just a regular motion we do, or what's the procedure?
This is Brian. That's correct. To formally record Sheila's resignation, we have received a letter that she has signed, and we need a motion to accept her resignation from the board.
Brian, can you tell us, because some folks are, we've not had somebody resign for some of our directors. What's the procedure for working with directors, less than a full set of directors of 5? What's the process? How long can we operate this way? What do we need to do?
This is Brian. So as long as you have 3 board members, which is a quorum of the seats on the board, then you can conduct business. There used to be legal requirements in place that required for you to appoint directors within, I feel like it was 2 or 3 months. And then if you didn't, then the law provided that the TCEQ had to appoint the replacement, which was an administrative hassle because TCEQ is very slow in reviewing applications, and it would take months to get those approved. Thankfully, I guess it was probably 2 sessions ago that was changed. So now the TCEQ may, but not must, appoint after 90 days or so. I'm kind of going from memory on the time period, but it's not mandatory. So you don't have quite the time crunch that you used to have in years past to get a director identified and appointed. But that being said, even though there's not a legal requirement that you have it done as soon as possible, still recommend that boards go ahead and do that, because it's that much easier without one director being on the board to be able to lose a quorum and not be able to conduct business. So
Sure.
do that. You start your search now and hopefully have someone identified to appoint to fill that seat in the next few months.
And Brian, this is Scott again. When the replacing of a director requires a nomination and a second and then a vote for approval by the board of directors, correct?
This is Brian. That's correct. The remaining members of the board have complete discretion to appoint a replacement as long as that person meets the legal requirements to be a director of the district, 18 years or older. They have to, the main one is that they own property that is subject to taxation within the district, or that they reside in the district. So those are the alternative requirements. And that's why Sheila had to resign from the board, because she moved out and did not retain any property in the district that would have otherwise allowed for her to continue to serve as a director.
And the director that we will appoint will fill out the remainder of the director's term, meaning that it would be up for election with whenever the previous director would have been elected, correct?
This is Brian. That is correct, Scott. There's no special election process for an appointed director. The appointed director serves out the remainder of the term of the director, the former director that they replaced. I can't recall. I feel like Sheila just got reseated in this cycle. We'd have to go and double check that, but I feel like she did. So it may be 3+ year term.
Well, I have one last question, because I know when I was on the board and we were going to try to have someone replace a director, we learned that if the director had lost in the most recent election, if the individual had run and not been elected, as a director. They could not be appointed, as I recall.
This is Brian. That's correct. So there is a obscure provision in Chapter 54 of the Water Code that's only for MUDs, that if you have either resigned or have run in that MUD election and lost, that you cannot be reappointed to the board. So I don't think we didn't have a contested election this cycle. So it should not be an issue for MUD 36.
I believe that's correct. I want to make sure all this stuff got mentioned because you're fixing to move into item 11. Well, no, we need to approve the resignation. I approve to accept Director Faxel resignation from the board. This is Scott Haynes. Do we have a second?
This is Jan. I'll second that.
I will now vote on the motion. Scott Haynes, aye. Jan Price,
Aye.
Mamie Polk,
Aye.
John Yours.
Aye.
Okay. So in item 11, consider appointment of new director to fill vacancy on the board of directors. All they have to do, we don't have any restrictions other than they reside in or own property in MUD 36.
This is Brian. Those are the two main requirements. I mean, there's other technical requirements about 18 or older, mentally competent. I mean, just basic boilerplate stuff like that. But the main thing is that they are residents, that person is a resident or owns property in the district that's subject to taxation. And as you mentioned a minute ago, that they have not either run and been defeated in a MUD 36 election or resigned from the MUD 36 board in the last 2 years.
Okay. So we need to consider appointment. The directors, if they have anyone they would like to or think would be a good candidate, Brian, who do they need to notify?
This is Brian. The way we've handled it over the last several years is that directors who have a potential candidate provide or obtain a resume from that person and provide that to Jim, and they have that in the board packet for the subsequent meeting. And the director who has identified the person can ask that candidate to attend the next board meeting to answer any questions that the directors may have. The directors can either make a decision at that meeting when they consider the candidate, or they can, if there's multiple candidates, they can just receive the information, ask questions, and then defer a decision until the subsequent meeting to give some thought to the candidates.
So this is Scott again. Anybody, the directors have a individual that they feel could fill the vacancy, please notify Jim. The restrictions we do have is that with only 4 board members, if we had a vote, it could be 2-2 and be a deadlock. We have to have 3 directors. That means we just have certain restrictions on how we can operate. I think we should be able to come up with a vacancy, and hopefully we can do this at a very early time frame. Anybody have any comments or discussion? Or I think all of us have lived in the district for a while, so we should have several people that would be able to fill the position. Are we going to provide Sheila with some sort of thank you for being a director or such, or?
A plaque.
Yeah, let's see if we can get that taken care of. All right, I'm gonna move on to item number 12, receive and review information of the 6th and new final grant accounting. Because I've heard the word final grant accounting
5
tossed
times.
around several times. I'm excited to see we have a new final account.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Chris Meeks, and it's It's a recap of the old sixth and final accounting. And so it is a presentation. I'm not able to share my screen, no internet right now, but it is in your packet beginning on page 22. As I go through this presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please stop me or ask them at the end, however you choose. But what we wanted to do, I'm going to move to page 23. What we wanted to do is kind of start with the history of the interim accounting and then just kind of walk through the path forward and everything. It's been a number of years. The sixth and final accounting started in 2017 and runs through 2027. So we just kind of wanted to bring up and do a brief recap of it. So the interim accounting started back in 1983, and it provided a funding for future expansions of the water and wastewater systems, not for maintenance of the systems, just for new capacity in the systems. So the interim accountings have traditionally been in 5-year increments. And so JPA at the time would work with Howard Hughes Corporation or the Woodlands Development Corporation at the time. And they would kind of say, okay, the developer would lay out, this is where we think we're going to put places over the next 5 years. The River Authority would get that information, and then we would evaluate the infrastructure that's in the ground or the infrastructure that needs to be built to sustain that development. For that development, we would standardize. And so obviously a mall has more of a capacity request than a home does. Well, it depends on the home, but most homes. So we standardized all the homes, multifamily units, malls, everything else into a single family dwelling unit equivalent, the SFDUE. And that equates to a 2,000 square foot home. And so what would happen is if a MUD purchases one SFDUE for water, they would get 430 gallons per day of capacity in the water system. If they purchased one wastewater SFDUE, they would get 217 gallons per day of capacity. So with the interim accountings and the sixth and final accounting, each of the MUDs, collectively the MUDs came together and funded the ongoing development needs for the Woodlands. That'll be important here in a second. So moving to the next page, some of the considerations and impacts that we reviewed, any regulatory requirements, the customer demands for water and wastewater services, and then the projected development from the developer. Put all that together, and from that, in this last case in 2017, we got a sixth and final accounting report, if you will. That report I'm going to send to Jim Stinson, and so if anybody would like a copy of it, he'll have a copy as soon as I'm able to get power back. Moving to the next page, purpose of sixth and final accounting and path forward. This is the page that has the road that goes through it with the 5 green billboards on it. The top 3 recap some of the things we've talked about before. The bottom 2 is where I want to focus on. So by January 1st of each year, Woodlands Water looks at the woodlands, looks at the land use, and compares it to what the sixth and final accounting had planned. That information is then turned over to the River Authority. It's accounting for what was projected to be built and those SFDUEs versus what was actually built in those SFDUEs. So the difference in the sixth and final accounting, after the sixth and final accounting rather than sixth and final accounting and before, any additional development in a MUD that is not accounted for in the sixth and final accounting or any of the previous ones, that additional capacity request will be funded solely by that MUD. In other words, if MUD 36 was going to have a mall developed somewhere in it and y'all needed 1,000 SFDUEs, water, wastewater, the River Authority doesn't have capacity for that. So if an extension of the wastewater plant or a new water plant was needed, that request would, the funding of that would have to come from MUD 36. Whereas in previous accountings, all the ones that have been done before, that request would be paid for by the collective MUDs. Moving on to the next page, items for consideration. Capacity is built and funded only for potential growth identified in the sixth and final accounting and any previous accountings as well. And so all available capacity, water and wastewater, has been sold. One thing to note when I'm talking about capacity here, just for clarifying purposes, this does not include anything coming from the GRP division, the actual demand of the water itself. When we're talking capacity here, we're talking like wastewater plant 1 can treat 7.8 million gallons a day. That's what we're talking about. The wells collectively, the groundwater wells may be able to produce more, but we're talking about the ground storage tanks, the pipes in the ground, the pumps, the motors, and stuff like that. So all that available capacity at this point has been sold. And so like we talked about before, any additional capacity request may trigger additional capital needs funded solely by the MUD. And as y'all know, redevelopment in the woodlands is, something that does occur. So we're looking at multifamily development and vertical development. The woodlands isn't growing out as much, it's growing up more. As time progresses, we're seeing more apartments and stuff like that coming forth. Then, of course, the last slide, 6 and final accounting, projected demands and SFDUEs per MUD. This table is pulled directly from the 6 and final accounting report. What it's showing is each of the MUDs and the water and wastewater SFDUEs they've purchased. So if you take the water SFDUE, multiply it by the 430 gallons per day of capacity that we talked about earlier, you get the water demand. When you take the wastewater SFDUE, multiply it by 217, you get the wastewater discharge, also known as wastewater demand. And so we just wanted to kind of recap this. We're almost halfway through the 6 and final accounting, and we're still a few years away from the ultimate development that's projected for the woodlands, but we figured it was a good time to bring it forward and project it or recap it so everybody has an understanding of what's going on. Do you have any questions I can answer?
Chris, this is Scott. Where is, in this new accounting process, where is the projected increases? Which MUDs will be increasing water and wastewater? And is MUD 36 one of them?
So the information I'm showing on the 6 and final accounting, that table, that's all the capacity that's been purchased by the MUDs. I know MUD 36 had bought, I want to say 25 SFDUEs over the past 12 months. And that was some of the very last remaining capacity that we had in the woodlands. And so at this time, I'd have to go back and dig up the information, take a look. Maybe Mike may have it readily available to see if there's any projected growth in 36, but that question on any potential growth is something that Woodlands Water takes a look at and provides us the projection.
Okay.
So
I understand.
Maybe
Okay.
better.
But you're saying MUD 36 has bought 25 single family dwelling units.
Additional, which has already been bought, and that was some of the last remaining capacity. So MUD 36 has 2011 water SFDUEs and 2169 wastewater SFDUEs, which handles, of course, all the existing infrastructure that you have, all the current residents and stuff like that, and may also include some additional capacity that's planned growth over the next 4 to 5 years.
This is Mike. The only other outstanding item would be the 9 SFDUEs for Honeycomb Ridge. On the replat, they went from 10 lots to 19 lots. They have not purchased those yet, but those are still outstanding.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Mike. Any questions for Chris related to the 6th and final accounting? How are we going to be reviewing this going forward, Jim?
This is a summary. We'll keep you informed as to, well, if we get a request from a developer to build something where you don't have capacity in your MUD, we'll have to look at getting him to fund that additional capacity. This is information at this point. You don't have any projects that are being planned. There's no action to be taken. It's just a kind of a summary as to where we are.
Great. All right, if there's no more questions, thank you, Chris. We will move to item 13. Receive information from San Jacinto River Authority Woodlands Division and the Woodlands Water Audit Committee regarding centralized wastewater treatment.
Well, good evening again. This is Chris Meeks. This information is in your packet, this presentation starting on page 30. What I'd like to do is give a summary of what the presentation's about, and if you'd still like me to give the presentation, I definitely can. Where I wanted to start is kind of explain how we came about consolidation. So last year, after we presented the 10-year project plan, the River Authority, Woodlands Water, and the Audit Committee met over a period of months and talked about the long-term financing of the infrastructure, the aging infrastructure in the woodlands. From that discussion, we expanded and said the 10-year project plan is just that. It's just a snapshot of 10 years. When we are looking at facilities, we're looking at 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 years in the future, much like we do for the water supplies for the region. And so wastewater plant 1 is about 50 years old. Service life for a lot of the assets in wastewater plant 1 is about 50 years old. Now, wastewater plant 1 has had 4 phases of improvements over the last 46 years, so they don't all turn 50 at the same day. So wastewater plant 1, what we're looking at is over the next time period of 2021 through 2045, so just about 20 years, wastewater plant 1, the various assets are going to be at the end of their service life. So basically, over the next 24 years, wastewater plant 1 will need to be replaced. So what we had looked at was a phased approach of 4 phases of renewal at the plant over a 20-year period. We looked at a high-level cost for that, estimated cost with 3% inflation, $210 million to $274 million. Well, then we started talking to the audit committee and looking at wastewater plant 2. Wastewater plant 2 in 2045 will be 50 years old. So we're looking at a 20-year renewal of wastewater plant 2 from 2045 to 2065. 3% inflation per year, somewhere in the ballpark of potentially 271 to 354 million. So that brought up the conversation of, is it more cost effective to regional or consolidate? What consolidation is, there's a lot of different ways, but the ones that we've talked about is you demolish wastewater plant 1 and you you expand wastewater plant 2. So the capacity you had at wastewater plant 1 is now at a central location at wastewater plant 2 site. So then that cost just for the wastewater plant to be moved over there is estimated between 100 and 151 million. What that does not include on that one slide is wastewater plant 2 is still going to need to be renewed in 2045 to 2065. So you'd add that cost to it if you're looking at, the full picture potentially. Another option for consolidation is to demolish wastewater plant 1 and 2 and build a new large facility at wastewater plant 2 site to handle the flow from plant 1 and plant 2 at that site. That cost estimated 186 million to 280 million. Both of those 2 consolidation options do not include the cost to convey the flow from plant 1 to plant 2. There is a lot of variables, there's a route study, there's a lot of things that need to be done to determine how to get the flow from plant 1 to plant 2. That cost is unknown at this point in time. So what the River Authority proposed to the audit committee and the trustees in November was to undergo a consolidation feasibility study. This study would be $500,000 to $1 million, take 12 months to do, and would be funded on by the unallocated bond funds that we believe we'll have left over from the bond that was sold in 2017 And the debt service is already included in the wholesale water, or excuse me, wastewater rates. So no rate increase, money's already on hand. The proposed process would be, preferably in March, we go back to the trustees with a request to solicit requests for qualifications from consultants. If we're approved, we meet with consultants, we identify a consultant, work with the scope, narrow down the cost from $500,000 to $1 million, get right exactly what the number is going to be, bring that back to the trustees for approval, then take it to our board for approval, then we go from there. So that's a high-level overview of the presentation. I've used a lot of the numbers, but there are some more slides. If you would like me to run through the presentation, I can, or I can answer any questions that you may have.
So this issue's been studied by the audit committee for about 3 months.
Yes, sir. We met with the audit committee at least 3 times, giving additional information. And as you can imagine, with this much money being discussed, there's a lot of what about and what ifs and stuff. So we've run a lot of different scenarios and thoughts, and that's an endless loop. So at some point, it's, the consolidation would need to be identified. We're only going to look at these things and then go from there. But they have looked at it for a period of months.
Who are the current members of the audit committee?
It's Paul Martin, Ron Wilson, and Kyle Mays. This is Chris Meeks again.
Okay,
Go ahead. Sorry.
this is John. So the study will be defined by the audit committee, but it may entail everything that you've told us about: replacing 1, moving 1 to 2, demoing 2, and building a new 2 for 1 and 2. So it'll include all of those things?
Yes, sir. It will include those items plus 2 additional items. The 2 additional items is, let me run through this. We'll have the baseline where we say, okay, consultant, tell us fine tune the cost and the schedule for renewal of wastewater plants 1 and 2.
Okay.
So that's our first piece. Then it's going to be consolidation and expand wastewater plant 2. Then another option would be to build a brand new facility for both facilities and demolish those 2. And then what I call the creative option, because obviously we can't think of everything. Consultants get paid to be creative. So the third option for consolidation would be for the consultant to identify a cost-effective means of consolidation for the facilities. Then they would also look at the conveyance. Option number 1 would be to put in a very large, about a 25 million gallon a day lift station at wastewater plant 1 and build a pipeline over to wastewater plant 2. And then, of course, a creative option. In lieu of a pump station, is there another means and method to move flow from plant 1 to plant 2? So there's a total of 6 different things that they will look at to kind of give a good spread of these are the items that are cost effective for consolidation.
Chris, this is Scott again. Who are we looking into to be the consultant to perform this work?
Very good question. At this point, we don't know. And I say that because the request for qualifications, once we put it out in solicited publicly, newspapers, website and stuff, the consultants that apply, they can't be a mom and pop engineering firm. This type of study is going to require a lot of different engineering disciplines, urban planning, GIS, not to mention the conveyance system. There's going to be a specialty over there. There's going to be a lot of different firms. So you're going to be looking at what I call a lot of the 3-letter firms, the CDM Smiths of the world, the Freeze and Nichols, some of the larger firms in a lot of cases, or you could have some smaller firms that partner with other firms. But when we solicit the request for qualifications, We'll get all their, basically their resumes in, what they've done, if they've done this before, how they've done it. We'll do interviews. We'll probably do some reference checks. And then from that, we'll actually rank each of the consultants. And then the highest ranking firm is the one that we'll begin negotiations with.
And who will be which parties will evaluate to make the decision on the consultant?
This currently, we have not actually identified, let's say, the selection team. Normally for RFQs like this, it's 2 or 3 folks from the Woodlands Division and 2 or 3 engineers from our technical services department, all River Authority employees.
Well, I have one last question. Will the consultant be involved with the, once they make proposals, will they be involved with supervising the projects that could occur?
If you mean if the consolidation does occur and we go to design and construction?
Correct.
Potentially. The way the RFQ will be worded is to, and let me back up and explain this. The process to go from today, feasibility study to construction is a 4-step process, is what we've proposed. Step 1 is the feasibility study. In the grand scheme of things, when you're talking to spending hundreds of $1 million, 500,000 to $1 million is relatively expensive. So feasibility study, is it feasible? At the end of it, if the MUD say, yes, we want to see some more data, we move to a master plan. The master plan is estimated $3 to $5 million in about 2 years. That's where they'll get a lot of the nuts and bolts, a lot of community engagement, a lot of technical details, getting into the weeds of a lot of things. At the end of that report, the MUDs can say, at the end of the feasibility, the MUDs can say, we're done, we don't want to go any further. There's no commitment beyond what's been paid for the study. If you want to go to a master plan, at the end of the master plan, the MUDs can say, we're done, we're out, we do not want to consolidate for whatever reason. There's no hundreds of $1 million on the table. There's no agreements to construct this consolidated facility. After the master plan comes into the preliminary engineering, the design, and the permitting. Once we move into that section, you're pretty well set in. You can still cut off at that point, but you're tens of millions in to consolidation at that point. So the consultant that we select for the feasibility study, as long as they're accountable and they do their job and they do it the way they're supposed to be, they could move into the master plan study. None of these steps are a for sure for the consultant. If at any, after the feasibility study, if we regroup and say this firm is not our firm to go do the master plan, a new RFQ can be issued, a new firm can be selected. If the plan is done and we've identified that this is not the firm, or we want to see if there's a different firm out there for the design, another RFQ can go out there and we can get another firm in there. In some cases, they do carry through the entire thing. In some cases, they're not accountable and they don't do what's being looked for by the MUDs and the River Authority, and we find a new consultant to do what we need.
All right, thank you, Chris. Anybody, does anyone have any questions for?
Yeah, this is John. Is in the study, is there room, if you decide to build a completely new wastewater treatment plant number 2 that would have the capacity for 1 and 2, is there room in the study to determine whether or not to contract that to a third party other than the SGRA, let them build it and run it? Would that be an economical thing to look at?
I think anything could be looked at at that point in time when you're talking O&M cost. I'm not sure how that variation would actually go into the study, but that is something that if the collective MUDs and the River Authority wanted to look at, we could look at.
I just think maybe there's somebody out there that's got some creative financing that, when I worked on the ship channel, we used Gulf Coast Waste Disposal as a third-party contractor for a lot of things like that. And they always found a way to get cheap money. So we shouldn't leave any stone unturned.
that is something we can look at. You may sense some hesitance in my voice. Before I came to the River Authority, I worked for a private operating company, and
Yeah.
we did DBOs. DBO is design, build, operate. We did build, operate. We did design, build. So we did a variation of a bunch of those. And I'll tell you, I mean, it is a private operating firm, so they are after money at the end of the day. And my own personal opinion is, if an operating company is going to come in, they're looking for a profit at the end of the day. And so a private firm is making a profit, whereas the River Authority is investing every dollar back into the infrastructure and the people that run it. But that's personal opinion coming from that side before. But that is something we can definitely kick around and see if there's an interest.
Okay.
Chris, this is Jan.
Yes,
In
ma'am.
my notes from the trustees meeting, you were referring to an answer to a question about how much this is going to affect our bills. I believe you said this might mean a $20 to $30 higher wastewater portion of our bills. Is that correct? Could you clarify that? Maybe I'm trying to write.
Yes, ma'am. Let me clarify. So at the trustees meeting, Trustee Custer had asked a question about the graph I showed, which is in your packet, potential impact to residential wastewater bills in addition to current bills. So based off of Trustee Custer's comments, I've adjusted that slide. How I've adjusted it is on the expand wastewater plant 2 option, I've added in the cost to renew wastewater plant 2, 2045 to 2065. And so that slide is a estimate, our estimate of what the impact in addition to the current bills would be for just 2 of the options. The blue line is status quo. Keep going the way we're going, replace plant 1 as is. Then after that's done, replace wastewater plant 2, the bond issuance, so on and so forth. What we think the potential impact would be. The other line that you see there is the expand wastewater plant 2 option, which does increase the bill right about $20 a month, up until about $20.45 or so, when it goes up to about $24, and then over to $31, compared to the status quo option, which in 2050 is about $43 or so. So any which way you look at it, either the status quo, what we've been doing, or the regional consolidation option, just to maintain the infrastructure in the woodlands, the water wastewater bills will be increasing.
And that increase is included, is besides what the current bill is now, which you say is $26 a month.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
An additional 20 to then 30 some more down the line a little bit, few years. We'll all be gone, won't we? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I think the important thing to note there is either way, there's going to be impacts. We're not going to go into the future without an impact to that $26 bill. It's just which direction do you go?
Yeah. Okay.
And Ms. Scott again, when is the audit committee going to make an evaluation of the alternatives and present it to the JPA?
Well, this is essentially it. It will be revisited at next month's meeting, and my anticipation is there's going to be a call for a vote by the trustees. I think the audit committee is poised to recommend this feasibility study go forward, and then the trustees are going to be voting on it. So if you have a strong feeling one way or other, let your trustee know.
Please.
This is a vote to proceed with a feasibility study.
Only, yes.
Okay. So the audit committee will present it next month. The MUDs will be aware of it also. And then I guess in April would be a vote with the.
No, I think the audit committee this is what they've presented. It's been presented. They're just gonna, my prediction is they'll come back at the March meeting as we recommend the board go forward with this, and then the trustees will vote.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jim.
Okay.
This is Jan. I don't see an action item on our agenda about this to vote on it, but kind of looking for guidance here, if this is the case.
This is Scott. I think what Jan's asking is maybe like a straw poll or this opinions by the directors to proceed with the feasibility study. For me, I think it's worthwhile to proceed with a feasibility study at this time.
Yeah, this is John. I think you have to get definition.
Okay. Thank you. That does it.
All right, well, Chris, thank you very much for presenting this tonight. And we will
Thank y'all.
look forward to evaluating information in the coming months. We'll move on to item 14, receive the attorney's report. Brian, are you still with us?
This is Brian. Yes, sir. So under the attorney's report, been, updating boards on the legislative session. Not much to update there this month between COVID and security concerns and now weather-related issues. There's not been much progress at the Capitol so far. And then some of you may have seen the news reports that Governor Abbott is putting ERCOT and electric power generation in Texas at the top of the priority list along with COVID this session. So I think that's going to slow things down even more. We'll, of course, keep you updated if there are bills that are making their way through the session that have a material impact on MUD business, but that's about it from the legislative perspective at this point. Also, Jim reported last month, we are taking a look at the Con-10 development agreement policy for any potential updates that may be needed. Don't know that MUD 36 has any upcoming projects where you would have developer reimbursements, but that is a global policy for all the Woodlands MUDs, so it would require action by all the MUDs to update that policy. Expect to have recommended changes, if necessary, brought to the board in the coming months. That's all I have under the attorney's report. Happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Brian, this is Scott. What's the calendar for the legislature like, when they have to have all proposed legislation entered?
This is Brian. So the session began mid-January, and it's required, the regular session is required to end by May 31st. The governor is authorized to bring the legislature back for special sessions for specific topics. Right now, with us already being into mid-February in this session, with the other restraints we have on conducting business in Austin this year, I wouldn't be surprised at all if a special session ends up being called over the electricity issue and ERCOT. I'm not thinking that they can do more than what I think they can in the time period that they have between now and May. But with electricity being such a large issue, I have a hard time thinking that they're going to get through that issue by the end of May, but we'll see.
I also have a question about the status of the Texcom and the injection wells in Conroe. The change in the entity's name. It's a minor thing, but it is something that's been dragging the Montgomery County through for several years. Is there any information available about what the status of that stuff is?
Scott, I told you that I would try to find out, and with everything that's been going on the last several days, I haven't, but I don't think I could have gotten a hold of anybody to get an answer anyway.
Okay, that's fine.
But we'll keep it on there for next month.
That's fine. Are any other questions for Brian? All right, Brian, thank you. We'll move on to item 15, receive the general manager's report.
A few items to highlight from the trustee meeting. We talked, trustee Lux, Bob Lux, a MUD 60 director and a trustee, has been representing the Woodlands Water Agency for a couple of years on the Texas Water Conservation Association. He's up for reappointment to that board and to the utility district panel, and receive support from the trustees to continue as our liaison to that group. I talked about the Houston Advanced Research Center completing their review of the Lone Star Groundwater District Phase 1 subsidence study. You should have received an email with an executive summary and some information on that report. I talked about my ongoing discussions with 2 neighborhoods regarding the poles that were installed for the AMI transmitting the signal. One is near the Slash Pine area in MUD 36, 6 and 36. I guess it's 36. And then the others over by Woodlands Parkway and Kirkendall. I'm meeting with those homeowners, looking at their concerns and just looking at options that might address those concerns, to plan to bring that back to the trustees and the MUDs in April, March or April. Trustee Martin reported he thinks there's going to be a refunding availability for the MUDs. Each year we look, once the audit's done for the Woodlands Water Agency, if our reserves exceed a certain threshold, we do a refunding back to the MUDs, and he thinks we're going to see that next month. The calculation will reveal a refunding. And I know John had asked a question about our payment to Amoresco, and I think we had reported that one of those did slip by us, but I thought that since that was already paid, it wasn't in your budget, we were going to just kind of accept that as a mistake on our part. Anyway, that's kind of where we are with that, and we'll talk about rates, I think, on the next agenda item.
This is Scott. Have any of the directors had comments from our residents related to the towers that have been erected in the in our area?
This is John. I've heard nothing.
This is Jan. I have not heard anything either.
I think there's a letter in your packet that was addressed to the board from at least one homeowner.
Yes.
Yeah. And I wouldn't call it a widespread concern. It's really a small 1 or 2 homeowners in each neighborhood that seem to be voicing the most concern.
I received a text from a resident I know who was not included in the packet. And when I provided information about what it was, the resident said, "Okay, thank you very much." Not as much a complaint as the one that we have included in our packet tonight. So I think it's something we need to be aware of, that more residents may, back up. A lot of times residents see something, they're not sure who they need to contact. Sometimes they try calling the township, so it may take a while for them to find out who it relates to. So I would think we need to be cognizant that we may have some residents that are not very happy about these towers.
Well, I know one of the couples or property owners asked for the link to be provided for this meeting, and if I remember, I think Shelley sent it, but I don't think they have signed on tonight.
Now we just need to be cognizant that we may have residents raise the issue.
Yes.
Jim, in any of the other districts, have you heard comments from residents about these? Because I know I've seen some stuff in the packet, other articles you've been talked to folks. I mean, what's the general consensus so far?
It's 2 neighborhoods, the neighborhood that you're aware of, and then another couple of homeowners in a neighborhood off by Woodlands Parkway in Kirkendall.
All right, well, Jim, please, as if the issue continues, We want to be informed about it and alternate avenues to proceed with what we can do about it.
That will be presented either in March or April. Yes, sir.
Okay. Any
And
questions for
just
Jim?
what I'm looking at is what, can we move the pole to another location that is not by anybody? Can we paint the pole? Can we put up a pine tree looking pole? You know, looking at all the options and the cost, and then I'll present it to the, and my guess is that whatever mud it's in would be responsible for that cost, not spread across all the muds, but we'll see.
How many towers are there going to be?
What is it, 16, I think, across the woodlands?
Okay.
They're already installed, all but one.
Okay, any other, Jim, did you have anything else or any questions for Jim? All right, thank you, Jim. We'll move on to item 16, discuss sewer rates and water rates.
And this was a continuation. I think last month we asked to give us some time to look at some item or some ideas. And of course, we put it off till the end. And then in the last week, things have really gone to hell in a handbasket. So we haven't had a chance to do a detailed study. I do have information from Amoresco that what they offer that they think is the best option is what they call a tax exempt lease. And that tax exempt lease can go for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. The current rate going rate would be around 2%. They just did one a few weeks ago for an entity that was 1.8%. So the interest rate's very low. I asked Chad, have you ever done one of these for a mud district? Now he had done many for municipalities, but had not done any with a mud district. So he was going to look into his group of co-workers to see if anybody had done a tax exempt lease for a mud district. And Brian, do you know of any reason why a mud district would not be eligible for a tax exempt lease? And Frost Bank is who has been doing these recently.
This is Brian. You're asking about tax exempt lease for, I didn't hear the first part of that.
Oh, for financing the $900,000 or whatever the mud district chooses to borrow for the AMI installation.
This is Brian. We would have to look into that in a little bit more detail. I know that there's a question in another district about a line of credit, and we've run that issue to ground. There are limitations out there for political subdivisions. I think at a minimum on some of these notes or short-term loans, there are some restrictions on time, and I think at around a 3-year time period. But I'll have to look into that in more detail once we get more information from Amoresco as to what they're offering.
Okay, well, and just he did say many cities have taken advantage of it, and it's just their choice at 5, 10, 15, or 20 years at a very low interest rate. And I just ran I know we've talked about adjusting the water and sewer rates to help generate revenue for this, but I will tell you, currently my opinion is that some sort of an add-on to the bill, either an add-on to cover the full cost or an add-on to give some assurances and a revenue stream would be, in my opinion, and I think Marine's recommended. Adjusting water and sewer rates may give you, it's not dependable revenue. People can adjust their watering habits and all sorts of things where that revenue may or may not be available. But just as an order of magnitude, if you did a full $900,000 over a 5-year term, that would be about $8 a month. So if you made that into a 10-year term, that would be about $4 a month to the average homeowner you've got about 1,700 connections. So just give you an order of magnitude of what you're looking at if you went the financing, full financing route. Of course, and if you had anything to buy down that 900,000, it would even be less. So that's a manageable number, in my opinion, for this type of challenge.
We also
Yep.
have the issue that we're not covering our sewer costs. We're running about $2,000 a month underwater on what we're getting billed for sewer and what we're getting as sewer revenue.
And I would recommend looking at that. You can change that at any time. If you remember, the other MUDs adopted a rate structure that kind of guarantees enough revenue to cover their sewer expenses. So that's something that I would encourage you to look at doing what the other MUDs have done. Lower the base rate and just charge for each 1,000 gallons of sewer that's billed.
Yeah, this is Brian. Jim, we probably will want to get more information from Amoresco on exactly what they're looking into, because there are limitations there in the water code, unfortunately, that, you know, a city generally has, most of them have home rule powers and are able to do anything that's not prohibited by law, where MUDs are limited power entities that don't have the authority to do anything outside of what they have specific statutory authorization to do. So that is something that we'll have to look more closely at before being able to move forward with that option.
Well, what I'd like to do is carry it over one more month and give us a chance to get a little more data and bring back for y'all to look at again next month.
This is Scott. I would definitely look forward to getting some information to be presented for our consideration. Any other comments related to the water and sewer rates?
No, that's okay.
This is Janice. I recall when we were discussing doing this whole thing that we were told that Amoresco would help us with the financing, and then maybe that wasn't a definite deal.
No, they had this was the option that he suggested was the easiest as far as they're working with cities, but there are other options as well.
Oh, okay.
If this one won't work for us, they have other options.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, this is Scott again. Are any of our other districts looking into these type of?
No, sir.
So once again, MUD 36 is trend setting.
It's hard to have low taxes and low water rates at the same time.
That's right. All right, are there not any more questions, then we will move on to item 17. Receive the Woodlands Water Trustees report. Hello, Jan.
Hi there. That's pages 48 and 49, the packet, and pretty self-explanatory. We've had a lot of explanation here of what we've heard at the trustees meeting, and I don't really have anything to add. So I'm available for questions if anybody has any.
This is this is about the trustees meeting. And I apologize if I've forgotten what the 10 man is. What is being referred to as the 10 man a couple of times in the minutes? Like Dr. Sekula Gibbs talks about proposal for improvements to the 10 man.
Is Chris still here?
Okay, I guess nobody knows what it is, or?
Yeah.
Please.
Waste treatment plant number 1, it's a device that was on one of the large sewer mains that's stuck up in the air to pull a vacuum on and vent that system to keep the fumes, I guess, down.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
just a big ugly looking thing that looks like a tin man.
Okay,
out of the yellow brick road, you know?
no more explanation needed. Thank you very much, Sean. Any questions for Jan? Okay, if not, any placement, matters for placement future agenda, we need to start considering a replacement for our director position on the board. I think that needs to be reviewed next month if possible. Anything, is something gonna be on the 6th in final grant accounting coming up, or? Okay. Well, we'll see. Anything else that people want to add for future agenda items?
We keep the thing about the sewer rate and the Amoresco financing, I think.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending tonight. I know it's not the best conditions around.
Scott, when you go up in your attic, this is what you ought to be looking for.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, mine was not quite that way, and I'm hoping not to find anything like that. I have seen that.
That was just right, because one of those little connectors just covered that up perfectly.
I bet it did. All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending tonight. We will adjourn, and gosh, it's been 12 months like this, guys.
When will we go back?
I don't know. I've had my first shot.
Have to.
I'm not going to take the vaccine.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll adjourn. We will see y'all next month. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Stay warm.
Bye-bye.
Yes.